This is a complicated tale, so bear with me as I try to explain everything that led me to believe my former housemate could have been a serial killer, or at least on his way to becoming one. It all started in the summer of 2015 when I moved in. At first, Mike, my housemate and landlord, seemed relatively normal, though a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the lease, he made a point of telling me never to go into the basement. I thought that was strange, but I needed a place to stay and everyone has their quirks, so I just shrugged it off at the time. As I spent more time with Mike, I began to realize just how deep his dysfunction ran. First off, he used meth. Now, I don't judge people for their vices, but this use was pretty extreme. He was one of the first people I knew who could use meth regularly and still maintain a full-time job and fairly successful life. But here's the thing. When he was using, he would often ramble on and make disturbing comments. He would joke about things like me smelling lye from the basement and not thinking anything of it. I remember asking him why he kept bringing it up, and he answered, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a mischievous grin. I tried to write it off as a poor sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He also insisted I keep him updated on my schedule, always wanting to know when I would be home. I remember one day when I took the day off work and he was visibly surprised and uncomfortable when he realized I was home. That same day, I heard strange noises from the basement, clanging and muffled shouting. His car was in the driveway, but he wasn't anywhere in the house or his bedroom. On other occasions, he would play incredibly loud music, sometimes NPR radio, blasting through the house. Looking back, I think he was trying to drown out other sounds. Mike also made disturbing comments about sex workers, casually stating, "You can do whatever you want to them, choke them, beat them to death, and no one cares." I confronted him about it, telling him it was messed up, but whenever he was high, he would return to talking about violence, often mentioning how he, as a normal white guy who owns a house, would never be suspected by the police. At that point, I started to wonder if it wasn't just twisted joking. It was starting to feel real. Then one day, while doing laundry, I began to notice a faint smell of decomposition. The house was relatively new, and being from upstate New York, I know that animals sometimes get trapped in walls and die. But this smell was coming from the garage. It didn't make sense. I decided to confront Mike in a roundabout way, expanding on his jokes. I told him he needed to clean up the bodies better because I could smell decomposition. His reaction was chilling. His eyes widened and his face shifted to something between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words before finally saying, "What? Really?" I told him I wasn't joking, and after a long pause he muttered, "Thanks for letting me know," before retreating to his bedroom and shutting the door. A few days later, while I was doing laundry again, he called for me from the crawlspace in the garage. He wanted me to come up there, but something in my gut screamed not to go. I made up an excuse to leave, grabbed my laundry, and got out of there. Mike spent a lot of time in the basement, which was locked with no doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard. I regret not going down there myself to see what was really going on. During the last couple of months I lived there, the comments became more graphic. He talked about sexual violence and women in a crude, violent manner. He showed me a video he made of bondage scenes mixed with distorted audio of women screaming and a creepy plague doctor figure. He was a graphic designer and an artist. It was disturbing. On their own, any of these things might have been nothing, but together, they made me uneasy. In October 2016, I left. I went to Oseti Ayati camp during the Standing Rock protests, driven both by a sense of purpose and a desperate need to get out of that house. That night before I left, Mike was drinking and tweaking again. He started up with the same disturbing talk about murder and violence. I told him that one day he'd be caught. He responded without the usual joking tone, saying that the police would never suspect him. He said it was such seriousness that it sent a chill through me. The next morning, I left without a word. For months, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done nothing, and the guilt ate at me, so I finally called Portland Crime Stoppers and gave them an anonymous tip about Mike, recounting everything I had experienced. The operator seemed interested and kept putting me on hold to consult with the police. I gave them as much detail as I could remember, hoping it would make a difference. It was a small comfort knowing that I had at least tried to do something. Fast forward to more recently, I told my mom about all of this, and she became curious. She found the house on Google Maps, and while looking at the street view, we noticed a large enclosed trailer in the driveway. It wasn't there when I lived there, and I can't think of any practical reason for it to be there, other than maybe for moving or hauling things to dispose of. Of course, that's pure speculation, but it left me wondering. I doubt I'll ever get closure on this unless Mike is eventually caught. I've encountered a lot of shady people in my life, but none of them left the impression Mike did on me. Whether or not you believe me, I hope I never cross paths with him again. I encountered a potential serial killer while working in Virginia, and the only reason I'm sure he didn't kill me was because I lied and told him my boss knew my exact location, when in reality, my boss wouldn't have realized I was missing for 24 hours. This is a long one, but please bear with me. 2 years ago, I worked for a company that specialized in measuring houses, a job not many people are familiar with. Essentially, I'd use an iPad to visit people's homes, draw up floor plans, and measure rooms for flooring projects. I was 25 years old and one of the few females in the position. I was really good at my job, which meant I got a lot of work. I usually handled anywhere between 10 to 14 houses a day, driving all over the place. One day I arrived at my last job of the day. The house was in the middle of nowhere and I was exhausted. To make matters worse, the client wasn't home when I arrived. He showed up about 10 minutes later. An awkward middle-aged man in office attire, including a tie. He apologized for being late and invited me into his home. Everything seemed fine at first. The house was spotless, minimalistic, and smelled like cleaning products. He had 2 cats lounging in the living room, but they didn't seem to take much notice of me. As I started to work, things began to take a weird turn. He said, "Wow, my cats love you. They don't usually warm up to strangers like this." The cats didn't even get up, much less approach me. I smiled awkwardly and kept working. Then he asked about my equipment. "Do they keep track of where you are on that thing?" he asked. Immediate red flag. "Yes," I replied. "My boss knows exactly where I am and how long each job should take." I lied without hesitation. He nodded, impressed by the technology. Then came the chilling comment. "Be careful, don't touch the gun on the nightstand. It might go off." He chuckled, but I couldn't shake the unease. I looked up and sure enough, there was a handgun sitting on the nightstand. I knew I had to keep my cool. He led me to another bedroom and once again warned me about a gun on the nightstand. At that point, I was sure something wasn't right. There were only 2 bedrooms in the scope of work, so I finished the measurements quickly. But then he stopped me. "Could you measure the basement stairs? I forgot to add them to the list, and I might want to carpet them later." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to go down there, but my customer service brain told me I had to comply. I reluctantly followed him to the basement door, and when I saw the stairs, I knew there was no way he was going to carpet them. They were old, wooden, and led to an unfinished basement. To get an accurate measurement, I had to go down those stairs. As I did, he stood blocking the doorway, casually asking again if my boss knew where I was. "Of course," I said, lying again. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, my heart was racing. The basement was dimly lit, and my eyes adjusted. I saw 7 deep freezers lining the walls. In the middle of the room, there was an old television set, VHS tapes scattered around, and a recliner facing the TV. Behind it, 2 shelves full of VHS tapes. At that moment, I realized one of 2 things was going to happen. Either he was going to let me go, or he was going to push me down the stairs. I held my breath, smiled to mask my fear, and began climbing the stairs. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I neared the top. As I reached the 5th step from the top, I felt him hesitate. The tension was so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. Then, to my shock and relief, he stepped aside. I bolted for the front door. He stopped me one last time. "Before you go, could you give my cats a treat? They really liked you." He was holding a bag of cat treats. I quickly gave the cats a treat, thanked him, and ran out of the house, barely making it to my car. The second I was out of the driveway, I had a full-blown panic attack and cried. I tried calling my boss, but I was in a dead zone. Here's the reality. My boss wouldn't have noticed I was missing for at least 24 hours because I hadn't yet routed my day for the next workday. Yes, he would have eventually noticed when I didn't check in, but by then, I'd probably be dead. I suffered from PTSD after this experience. I couldn't sleep for a week, and I was terrified to go back to work, but I had no choice. This day still haunts me. The worst part? I was so rattled that I forgot to write down the address.